What we see in humans, we see it in animals, I mean, we see it in mammals.
He appeared just like how you would expect Diddy to appear for.
The psychologist felt that he was no longer a threat to.
An empire built on fame, fortune, and firepower is now facing the very systems he once outmaneuvered.
Holmes had a challenging Christmas this year, spending his first holiday season away from family. Sources indicate that the 55-year-old rapper experienced a meltdown while incarcerated at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York, where he was taken for observation due to mental instability. The music mogul, arrested in September on charges including racketeering, conspiracy, and trafficking, was reportedly hoping to secure bail by now. Spending the holidays behind bars was a nightmare for him, an insider told The Sun, noting that Combs managed to regain composure through meditation and deep breathing, although it took several hours
to calm himself within the confines of one of America's most notorious detention centers. Whispers abound. Is this the fall of Diddy Combs, or is something more sinister being uncovered? Diddy has long been no stranger to the spotlight. For decades, he's ruled stages, built billion-dollar empires, and partied with the world's elite. The man who gifted us iconic tracks like I'll Be Missing You and Bad Boy for Life carefully cultivated an image of invincible luxury. I adjusted the phrasing to make it flow more smoothly and swap in some alternative words while preserving the original meaning. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks.
What makes it worse is the food. Mostly everything is stale food, is old food that's donated by other people that they wrap up or they cook for you. Mostly everything they have is full of not roaches and the giant cockroaches. You know, you can smell the mold, you can smell the rot, you can smell the jail that it needs to be rebuilt. It needs help. I don't think anyone should be in that particular jail.
There are lots of different people inside that jail. We know that there's a wing that houses high-profile prisoners. R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell, now P. Diddy's in there. Are you aware of the high-profile prisoners? Do you have any interaction with them?
I don't have any, and we never had interaction with high-profile prisoners at all.
And one of the main reasons that a lot of people know about the Metropolitan Detention Center was because it made headlines in 2019. And one of the issues they had was keeping their prison population warm. And it gets extremely cold in Brooklyn.
Well, in 2019, something went wrong. They had a power outage. They didn't have any water. They didn't have any lights. They didn't have any heat. And the mayor the city council tried to bring over blankets, and the warden wouldn't accept it. They were banging. My brother called me from a cell phone that was not supposed to be there. And he cried. He said, "Listen, I think I'm gonna die in here." So I panicked. I said, "What the hell you mean? You having problems with a prisoner? Do I have to, call a lawyer or what can I do?" He said, "No, I'm gonna freeze to death." I said, "Freeze?" He said, "Yeah, we don't have no water." So I called the news station and made a whole big show. And I went down there and I had to do something about it, not just for my brother, but for anybody. He was telling me that he thought his roommate was going to die because his feet was turning purple. They didn't give my brother his medication. No gas, no lights, no water.
Accustomed to the luxury of five-star treatment, Diddy's adjustment to the harsh, unforgiving conditions at MDC has been nothing short of a shock. So, what does a day in the life of the music mogul look like now this revision maintains the essence while streamlining the flow? Let me know if you'd like to adjust anything further.
Conditions inside of the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn during a 7-day power outage that caused protest and outrage by elected officials because of the cold temperatures and lack of heat were much worse than initially reported, according to new reporting by the New York Times. The accounts, according to the Times, are based on inmates, their defense lawyers, jail staff, union officials, and lawmakers. The report indicates inmates complained of cold, brackish water that ran from the taps. A client known to swallow razor blades said he had not gotten his psychiatric dose. In another cell, a man lay on bloody sheets. That man had an infection on his leg, according to the Times, that got worse during the blackout. Allegedly, he had been denied antibiotics and Tylenol by jail staff. He was told to wash the wound with soap and water. The warden at the jail, which houses some 1,600 inmates, Mr. Herman Quay, has also been heavily criticized as dismissive and having a lack of urgency by lawmakers, activists, and even his own staff. According to the Times, union officials say Mr. Quay failed to set up an emergency command center or give staff instructions other than to keep inmates locked up. At one point, conditions were so bad that one inmate told his family a correction officer opened his cell door, allowing him into the warmer common area. "I don't know what's going on here," the guard told him, "but this is inhuman."
He described the food as nothing more than inmate slop. Forget about fine dining and imported wines. Even commissary snacks have become a rare luxury.
Food items that would be brought to him, and then obviously he'd be under 24-hour supervision, observation, so to speak. Would have had several visits from a psychologist or a clinician coming to check on him at least once every several hours, and having those conversations with him to see how he's feeling, what kind of mood he's in, and then he would have been taken off suicide watch after the psychologist felt that he was no longer a threat to himself for self-harm.
Diddy isn't in the general population, though it's hardly an upgrade. He's been placed in the special housing unit, reserved for high-profile inmates, those needing protective custody, or individuals considered a security threat.
This is a man going from private chefs and food from across the world to a set menu just like any other detainee or inmate. What can you tell us about the food in the commissary in a place like the Federal Detention Center in Brooklyn?
It's a difference. That much I can tell you. You're going to have a lot of starchy foods, cereals. If you get any vegetables at all, they're old, so to speak. They are not fresh. Same fruits and vegetables, no good. A lot of processed food, some rice and beans and muffins and things that generally most people don't like to eat. It's not terribly healthy. And again, the government would say that is a consequence of this process. So certainly it is an adjustment. Most people will lose weight. And it's hard because he can't even really exercise in this environment. There's no outdoor, like I've said before, it's not one of these camps where you can walk around a track. Even in a high security penitentiary like Atlanta, there's going to be a track and outdoors. When you're in a detention center, locked down 23 hours a day, not eating healthy foods or getting your medications, it could test even the strongest person. And again, that's what I would say to him. Your family is watching. There are people, so many are critical of him, I understand, but there are also those that love and support him who are watching. So as crazy as it sounds to some, and I've been called crazy, it's an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, to express to his family. Others have gone through misery and struggle. They have emerged strong, with dignity, with a plan. And as I said earlier, once he embraces a better message, that it's not about him and how miserable his living situation is, but rather people he might have hurt, that's when he can get on the right side and get towards eventually getting out of there, and also a shorter sentence with betterment.
For a man who spent his life surrounded by adoring fans and a constant entourage, the silence must be suffocating. Conversations are limited to brief, monitored calls and the occasional interaction with guards. Even stepping out for recreation involves a full-body strip search, a humiliating ordeal that strips away any remaining sense of dignity.
About what we normally call special housing unit. So there's two types of detention in terms of being in special housing. One is administrative detention, and I'll go back to that point here in a second, and then disciplinary segregation. Disciplinary segregation is for individuals who have been went through a disciplinary process for an infraction of the rules and regulations of the institution, whether it be in a fight or any other acts that go against the policies of the institution, the orderly and safe running of the institution, and that is for a specific period of time. What Mr. Combs may be in as far as administrative detention is when someone is under investigation for a possible infraction against the rules of the institution, or they could be in protective custody because they may fear of their life, which is a question probably would have been asked of him once he was in an intake process. Additionally, we're talking about someone who is high profile, who was just arrested here less than 3 weeks.
Former inmates and prison consultants have compared the SAU experience to psychological torture. Diddy may be a mogul, but in the SAU, he's just another number in the system.
A lockdown These lockdowns are akin to solitary confinement. People are relegated to their cells for 23, 24 hours a day for an interminable period of time. They're denied access to showers. They're denied access to hot food. They're denied access to the telephone to speak with their loved ones. It's much more difficult for them to meet with their attorneys in any sort of expeditious fashion. It puts a tremendous amount of strain on people, and that's just notwithstanding the psychological impact of being confined to a very tiny cell with another person for days at a time. In addition to the psychological impact of being locked in on a regular basis, our clients routinely complain about inadequate amounts of food that oftentimes is inedible. People routinely complain of inadequate access to recreation. So I have clients there who throughout their entire time at MDC Brooklyn never saw the sun. Never were allowed to go outside and be able to just breathe fresh air. There's also the issue of safety. So when there's a dispute or when there's a problem between, detainees, and you can obviously imagine how being locked up for interminable periods of time only enhances the stress level.
For many, there's an assumption that wealth and status can buy anything, even leniency behind bars. But the federal system doesn't operate that way. Former inmate Timothy Smith explained that in places like MDC, money and fame hold no weight. Commissary items are scarce, and even basic hygiene products can feel like a luxury.
Has been in the spotlight for decades. He's obviously got a pretty big bank account, living in mansions in multiple cities, and that's what he's used to. And all of a sudden, he's in a prison that's being described as deplorable. I mean, just that unto itself, is that a major change?
Of course, the bigger they come, the harder they fall. And I sort of think that's what the prurient interest of the public is. Jail is terrible for anybody. But for someone who's used to having people wait on them hand and foot and never stands in line and always, gets front row and gets the best table and gets to have the exact opposite, what a life-changing moment. I mean, it's just incredible. And, it brings into context our whole system of innocent to proven guilty. Why is he not being given bond? And, we can debate that all day long. Of all people that's unlikely to flee or get away, well, he's got the resources to flee, but he's so recognizable. And isn't he innocent till proven guilty? Well, yeah, but, we have to recognize there are degrees of innocent till proven guilty. When you have this much...
Psychologists have extensively studied the impact of solitary confinement, and the results are alarming. Extended isolation often leads to depression, paranoia, and even hallucinations.
It's hard for me to speak to each individual's experience. I'm confident that no matter who you are or where you're being held in MDC Brooklyn, it is an extremely challenging place. And again, what makes it so challenging is that it's like essentially like a black hole. So if you have an emergency medical issue, if your blood sugar is too high and you're a diabetic or you have some sort of a heart attack or a medical emergency, there's absolutely no guarantees that you're going to be receiving medical care. I've heard horror stories from clients where one of their cellmates has collapsed and they're banging on their cell door during a lockdown, begging for a correctional officer to come and intervene, and nobody comes for minutes. And again, I'm not saying that's because people in the MDC Brooklyn don't care. I'm just saying there's not enough of them there. And it shouldn't be the case that while you're awaiting trial on serious federal charges, that you also have to be worried, am I going to make it out of here alive? Or am I going to make it out of here without being, stabbed or beaten? Dealing with a federal criminal case is stressful enough. And having to sort of deal with all the other atmospherics at MDC Brooklyn makes it true.
Federal cases are notoriously hard to win, with a conviction rate exceeding 90%, leaving the odds heavily stacked against Diddy. While his legal team is mounting an aggressive defense, the stakes couldn't be higher. A guilty verdict could condemn him to spending the rest of his life in prison.
Solitary confinement is toxic to mental function. There's a particular illness that results from being in solitary confinement. It's a delirium. It's a neuropsychiatric, almost a medical, a neurologic disease. What we see in humans, we see it in animals, we see it in mammals.
Now, Suppose that in addition to an environment that is merely strange, we produce one that's really frightening.
Dr. Harry Harlow in the 1950s did some experimentation with monkeys, studying the effect of social isolation. And one of his experiments involved taking monkeys who had been raised with other monkeys, so they were socialized and okay, and then putting them in what was amounted to a solitary confinement chamber.
Distressed. He may die for want of love.
You'd see them rocking and shaking and sort of ritualistic, compulsive behavior. And after some period of time, they brought them out and put them into a cage with other animals. These monkeys were massively impaired. They were frightened, hiding. And then they would have sudden aggression, attacking each other. Very different behavior, very abnormal behavior. There was no recovery. These animals didn't recover from this.
Be a long time, and it's all going to depend on how this trial turns out. So for the racketeering conspiracy charge, the maximum penalty is life in prison. But in 2022, people convicted of RICO crimes served an average of around 10 years in jail, so it's going to depend on that. For the sex trafficking charge, the Department of Justice says the average sentence ranges from 15 to 30 years, but there's a mandatory 15-year minimum sentence that's set by federal law for victims who are 14 and under. So it could be a lot more based on the number of victims. We're just going to have to wait and see. And then for the transportation for prostitution charge, sentences do range from 5 to 10 years, but it really does depend on the circumstance for that one. So 10 years is the statutory maximum under the federal law, so we'll have to see what comes.
Appeal to Judge Carter. It did not go our way. The fight continues. We're not giving up by a long shot. I told Mr. Combs I'm going to try and get his case to trial as quickly as possible. I'm going to try and minimize the amount of time he spends in very, very difficult and I believe inhumane housing conditions in the special housing unit of the Metropolitan Detention Facility. And I'm going to do everything that I can to move his case as quickly as possible. I understand that the government has a great amount of electronic devices that they have to download and provide to me. But everything's on the government's timetable. Nothing's on the defendant's timetable. And they're going to have to accommodate me and him and give us a quick trial. And I'm going to be pushing for that. He's ready. He's focused. He has been ready to defend this case since he first found out about this case. Nothing has changed from his